to thank everybody who is joining me live here on this Tuesday evening, or if you're tuning in after as well, thank you very much for clicking the link to join on to this live stream. Again, even if you're tuning in after, it would still greatly support if you are hitting that like button to get this weather information out, as I'm not only talking about the severe weather that is ongoing over parts of the plains where we're having as high as a level 4 of 7 on my ONW severe scale as we go through the rest of today and through tonight. We've also got severe weather expected that I'm going to break down for the Mississippi Valley region, as we're going to see a big threat there all the way on up into the Midwest and Great Lakes. I'll tell you about an area that I think could end up having the actual highest potential for tornadoes in this entire zone, and hint, hint, it's not necessarily in the red zone that's highlighted on screen for April 2nd. I'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about severe weather that could be ongoing into April 3rd, April 4th, and April 5th with a stalling boundary, and then a new storm system that's going to ramp on up. A very active stretch of weather is ahead, so buckle down. I've got all the information you need to know, again, whether you're with me here live or watching after. Thank you very much for tuning into this stream. This is a forecast update, so if you are tuning into this during our Tuesday evening, of course, we do have some severe weather already ongoing in this risk area over parts of Texas, Oklahoma, stretching on up into Kansas. As we go through the rest of this evening, we are going to be watching more widely scattered damaging winds of 60 to 70 miles per hour being possible. Scattered large hail being possible. In fact, we've already seen that occurring near Enid, Oklahoma, and then into points northeastbound. We've seen a supercell so far this evening. Over the last hour, especially as of 6:45 p.m. Central Time, we've seen some hail of 2 inches or greater, nearing baseball size, being added into the talk in the severe thunderstorm warning that's been moving there. Tornadoes will also be a threat with some of those supercells that we see, as well as a couple of the line segments we'll see developing into parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and western Missouri. There is that conditional threat for a strong tornado. It's definitely not been playing out so far, but nonetheless, we could still see that threat ramping up, especially as we go through sundown and into a few hours after. Something we'll be watching with this conditional threat into parts of, again, the Central Plains, starting to push a little bit closer into the Mississippi Valley region by the time we go into the night tonight. Let's go ahead and jump on over to Radar Omega now so that you can get a general idea of how things are anticipated to play out as we go through the rest of this evening. Then we'll go ahead and jump into the forecast and start a deep dive on what's going to happen by the time we go into our April 2nd, which is, of course, our Wednesday. Notice as we go through the rest of this evening, a triple R model indicating more supercells possible, really along a corridor that stretches anywhere from parts of Kansas City, Missouri, all the way back down through central Oklahoma. So you need to be on the lookout for that possibility of some strong storms, and these could have that potential for, again, especially that very large hail. That at the minimum is going to be a threat out of these supercells, and any of them that do fire along this line, again, from parts of central and eastern Kansas all the way back down to North Texas through the rest of at least the evening hours by the time we get through midnight tonight. We'll also have that threat for a conditional strong tornado potential. You need to prepare for the worst as if that's going to happen, and know the lowest, most interior room or your home or building if you're watching this on our Tuesday evening and this threat has not played out for you just yet in places like Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. By the time we go overnight tonight, we're going to continue to be watching storms training over some of the same areas. Wouldn't even rule a flood threat out of this activity, as it stretches really anywhere from parts of Illinois all the way back on over here to Omaha, Lincoln, and Nebraska, Salina, Kansas. This corridor having the potential for especially some heavy rain, some isolated gusty winds, even that possibility of the hail there, especially as you get back down to the southwestern end of this cluster, where we'll see on and off storms as we go through a lot of the night tonight. Manhattan, Kansas, St. Joseph, Missouri, Maryville, Missouri, and it includes you guys for that risk of the heavy rain, the gusty winds, the hail as we go through the night. And then overnight tonight, we could see some additional storm development that stretches all the way back down into some of the zones, watching these supercells possible this evening. Less of a tornado threat, although it won't be zero necessarily, but a new round of especially damaging winds and hail possible out of Kansas and some parts of Oklahoma before that begins trying to extend over into some parts of Arkansas, but particularly getting on up here into the Midwest. That's where we'll likely see our severe weather threat carrying out of tonight. And as we go into our Wednesday, and that leads me back on over now to my ONW severe scale, where I want to show you that, again, we do have... That was the wrong graphic. There we go. On the ONW severe scale for our Wednesday, April 2nd, this also includes Wednesday night. We are as high as a level 5 of 7 for severe weather potential, including parts of Arkansas. That's going to stretch into parts of Missouri, far southern Illinois, far southwestern Indiana, as well as western Kentucky and western Tennessee. But a bigger level 4 of 7 anywhere from far northeast Texas up into parts of the lower Great Lakes. And in the lower Great Lakes region and around the southern part of Lake Michigan in particular into the Chicago metro area, we'll see what I do. I might try to do one more final live update for this threat as we get into our Wednesday early to mid-morning time frame that you can tune in then or after as well. And what's interesting about the threat for Wednesday is that there's actually a very conditional threat, not only with the tornadoes and especially the strong tornado potential we could see further down the Mississippi Valley in this red shaded area where we're obviously having the highest confidence in some form or fashion of at least a damaging wind and hail threat, but we'll also have that potential for some strong tornadoes up here with a secondary line of storms that could develop somewhere in parts of Illinois and far southern Wisconsin, and I think that is a threat that we need to kind of keep an eye on as well. Anywhere from far north central parts of Texas all the way on up into central Michigan and points in between. A broad severe weather event likely, and this is looking very similar in terms of at least having damaging winds and hail as to a lot of the recent events that we've seen. And of course, there is that, once again, conditional tornado threat that we had it back on Sunday. Maybe it'll pan out this time. I'll talk about some of those ingredients momentarily. But either way, scattered to widespread damaging winds look likely, scattered large to very large hail looks likely, and there will also be that potential for the tornadoes as I was just mentioning. Going on over now to the HRRR model, and we're going to pivot on over to this graphic so you can see it a little bit better. This is your significant tornado parameter, and this is basically a 0 to 10 scale that does kind of some of the dirty work within this model, kind of blending some pieces of energy, some ingredients together that kind of come together and form tornado potential, and seeing how high a lot of those ingredients are going to be on the table. You can see as we go through the rest of this evening, of course, we're seeing that very high amount of tornado potential energy in place, but you have to have the storms actually fire on up through Texas, Oklahoma, and southern Kansas to get that potential for the tornadoes, and since there's a very limited amount of storms, that's why the risk has been a lot more conditional for today. There's also been some other stuff at play as well. We've seen some clouds working over some of these areas. It hasn't been the most favorable environment, even though we do have a lot of the wind shear, we have a lot of the low-level instability, strong winds moving in to technically support the threat as we go through tonight. So again, be on the lookout if you are watching this, especially on our Tuesday evening, and you still have that tornado threat ahead of you there into parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, surrounding spots, because there is enough energy in place for that conditional tornado threat to become more concerning. But let's talk more about what's going to happen by the time we go into our Wednesday, April 2nd of 2025, where there is your thin band right there of that tornado energy in place with around a 5 or 6 for a lot of these zones into the red and pink shade, in a very thin corridor that looks like it's going to extend from around northern Louisiana, coming on up here through eastern Arkansas, into parts of western Tennessee, western Kentucky, and southern Indiana. That's going to be along and ahead of a likely training band of storms that's going to develop. That band of storms will already have the potential for damaging winds and hail, but we will have that potential along and especially right out ahead of it as it works into that tornado energy on screen for some of the tornadoes. It is, again, a very conditional threat, though, because there is a little bit of a question as to how many discrete or more isolated supercells we're going to be able to have running ahead of the main line. If you don't have discrete supercells, you tend to have a much lower, especially strong tornado threat. Where we could see discrete supercells as the day goes on, though, there's your secondary prime environment. I want to zoom in on this just a little bit more, specifically zooming in closer to the Illinois region. Do you see that secondary little area right on up there near Chicago? I mean, this model is indicating that spot literally being right on Chicago for some of the stronger tornado type ingredients as we go deeper through the day Wednesday. I think we could get some additional storm development up there. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the timing for the possible storms as we go through the day Wednesday now using the HRRR model. In no way is this going to be perfect, but I think it gives the general idea that we'll have the potential for isolated severe storms anywhere from Iowa and northern Missouri, stretching all the way on over to any of this activity that we might have through the lower Great Lakes, even through the early to mid-morning hours as we go through our Wednesday from Davenport and Galesburg there in Illinois, all the way on over to Marion and surrounding spots there in Ohio, even southern Michigan, a big band of rain and storms. And again, some of this could at least have some isolated severe weather activity as we go throughout the earlier part of the day. The longer that this activity does stick around in a place like Chicago, the lower that threat that's going to be likely very conditional later in the day will be. But I want to show you here on this model, I'll show this zone first, and then we'll talk more about that more confident threat further down at the south. Look at this. HRRR model certainly indicating some additional storm activity ramping up, almost very discrete in nature. might form a little bit more of a line, but we could see some discrete cells embedded in this as well. It's just something to watch. I'm very intrigued by this late day development that we could have swirling around through parts of Wisconsin, even up into the central part of the state, into northern Illinois, kind of behind some of the morning activity we see. And this model indicates a lot of that morning activity clearing up in a place like Chicago by around noon, 1, 2 p.m. If that were to be the case, these storms would have plenty of time to kind of move in from the west where they could be more discrete, try to form at least a line with more damaging wind and hail threats, to say the least. I think Chicago could have that potential for that morning isolated round, and then maybe this more conditional strong round as more of a guarantee, but it's no guarantee right now, and that's why I want you to stay updated to my channel. I'll surely have some sort of community post update, or maybe a morning live stream tomorrow, as I mentioned, to cover more about that conditional threat. But let's talk about the bigger scale threat. Of course, the level 4 and 5 zone stretches all the way from southern Michigan all the way back down to northeastern parts of Texas and northern Louisiana. And you can see how storms are anticipated to begin erupting, likely somewhere out of Missouri and into Arkansas as we go through the afternoon, breaking a cap or a little bit of a warm layer in the atmosphere. That's going to kind of prevent updrafts from getting going through some parts of the day. As we see these storms develop, the guidance is currently indicating more of a hail and wind threat. We'll see what we get as we go deeper into the afternoon and evening, but of course that is where the tornado energy is likely going to be developing kind of right along and ahead of that line, as I was showing earlier, while the line is just on the western side of the circled area that I have on screen here. As we get towards possibly maybe the middle of the afternoon to the later part of the afternoon, we will begin to see that environment become even more primed up with stronger wind shear, stronger low-level ingredients, including moisture, going all the way on up towards Illinois and Indiana, the southern parts of those states. And, you can see a little cell there, maybe northern Mississippi getting the possibility of a supercell storm sometime as we go through the late afternoon into the evening. Something we'll have to watch. Again, I think the main line itself, though, that slowly creeps in from the west, that could be from around St. Louis back down to Little Rock and points in between at around, say, 3, 4, 5 o'clock if this guidance holds. That line is probably going to be more of a damaging wind and hail threat. It's going to be on the leading edge of that line where we could get more notches or little inflow spots where we can get tornadoes to also form on the leading edge of the line. We could even have a few supercells out ahead of that. And of course, it would be with those supercells where we would really get that very conditional but high ceiling tornado threat to come to life. You can see a few of those supercells certainly showing up on this guidance here. That's why the tornado threat, according to the Storm Prediction Center, is likely peaking somewhere here out of northwestern Tennessee, moving into southwestern parts of Kentucky. Again, the peak for that possibly being sometime here as we go through the late afternoon into the evening. Around that same time, that would be when we'd be watching that conditional threat that I was talking about just a minute ago, up towards parts of Wisconsin, Illinois. And then, of course, there's your broader line. The main reason that we have at least a level 3 or level 4 of 7 over a big zone, this entire corridor from North Texas all the way on up here through east central parts of Illinois and west central parts of Indiana, expecting widespread possibilities of damaging winds of 60 to 70 miles per hour. We're going to be watching the hail. We're going to be watching flooding as well along this line possibly. And then, of course, again, there is that tornado threat right on the leading edge, and that's what we'll have to watch for as we go through around at least 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. I do think by the time we go deeper through the evening, there's a little bit more questions in what happens out of the northern side of this line and exactly the timing and impacts for places like eastern Indiana getting into parts of Ohio and northern Kentucky. We could definitely see some severe weather. That's why I have level 2s and level 3s over a lot of this zone. But I think the main threats up there would be damaging winds and hail. Same would go with most of this line, I think, as we go deeper through the night. It looks, based on current guidance anyway, and the NAM model does the same with a lot of this timing of the storms as well, even though it doesn't show the storms in the exact same line that this HRRR does as we go towards, say, midnight into our Wednesday night going into early Thursday, which is what we're looking at on screen right here. You can definitely see the general trend that this model, and again, what I'm mentioning, the NAM model is showing as well. Generally, less discrete supercell activity and more of a general line segment of storms kind of stretching all the way from Arkansas all the way on up into parts of the Ohio Valley. So we'll definitely have to watch, again, the damaging winds and hail by this point in time. I think the tornado threat will go down as the night goes on. Still something to watch, though, here into especially places like, say, Tennessee, Kentucky, and surrounding spots. These storms will likely weaken into the overnight, but they'll be producing more and more flooding as they sit over the same zones as we see the low pressure fueling these storms quickly moving to the northeast and then leaving a stalled boundary behind. That boundary could also lead to overnight storm development from the south to the north, along and around the Red River Valley as you exit North Texas and get into southern parts of Oklahoma. A lot of this activity between Oklahoma City and Dallas could be severe, with especially wind and hail as threats. And that's going to be especially into the overnight hours of Wednesday night into Thursday. And then we're pretty much done with the Wednesday night severe scale period that I showed on my risk graphic a moment ago. In addition to the severe weather, of course, that we see on those periods of time from around Wednesday and Wednesday night, the severe weather I've already talked about for tonight, Look at what we're also going to have by the time we get to Thursday. Yeah, I'm anticipating more severe weather Thursday into Thursday night with at least scattered to ignore the scattered to widespread damaging wind thing there on the left. Let's actually get rid of that for now. Let's just talk about the general risk zone from Texas and Oklahoma all the way up to the Ohio Valley. At least a level 3 of 7 for scattered severe weather, certainly looking possible, if not likely, for April 3rd. That is for, again, Thursday into Thursday night, as we'll see that stalling boundary continuing to produce more severe weather. And I think flooding will be a bigger concern as we go through the day, Thursday, in a lot of these zones. As we go into Friday, again, ignore that left side. There are those threats. Not talking about the specific threats just yet, but you can see I've analyzed the model guidance, and we do have that potential for a level 3 of 7 on my ONW severe scale from Texas, getting on up into the Ohio Valley once again, as we see that stalled boundary, as well as a new storm beginning to form up as we go deeper through the day, Friday into Friday night. And then by the time we go towards Saturday, again, ignore the threats on the left side of the screen as I delete them there. What you're looking at, though, is a broad zone with another potential for severe weather as we go towards April 5th. And again, a lot of parts of the Mississippi Valley getting in on a risk. I think we could see a very elevated tornado threat sometime Saturday into Saturday night down over the lower Mississippi Valley in particular, places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee. More details to come on that, but just to show you how active this pattern really is, let's go ahead and pivot on over now to the European model on screen. And as you can see, look at this. We've got the storms tonight, of course. Again, I'm doing this a live stream on our Tuesday evening with storms possible from the Central Plains. The threat moves to the Midwest and Mississippi Valley as we go into our late Wednesday. And then notice we kind of see the old boundary from the system lingering behind, and that's where we'll likely see a significant flood threat develop from the Ohio Valley back down here through at least Arkansas, especially by the time we go through the day Thursday. If flooding isn't already ongoing Wednesday into Wednesday night, by Thursday into Thursday night, more storms. That's going to lead to a lot more problems, and we could even see life-threatening types of flooding, very dangerous flood-covered roadways, all kinds of those hazards. And that's going to be, again, by the time we get to Thursday at the very latest for those hazards to begin. And we'll see more storms over parts of the Ohio Valley, Mississippi Valley, maybe a little bit of a reprieve Friday, but by Saturday into Sunday, more storms moving in with another low that's going to form back down to the southwest of our most recent one. Again, there's your severe weather risk along and ahead of that line probably by the time we go towards Saturday and Saturday night. And this reminds me a little bit in ways of the severe weather event that we saw back in 2023. Late March, of course, the Rolling 4 tornado. That's a very infamous tornado. I don't want to, make too many comparisons just yet, but it certainly looks like a very strong low-level wind field, a similar initial risk zone being highlighted. I mean, look at that, a very strong low-level jet kicking on up. That would be moving in from the south to the north. As you go further on up in the atmosphere, let's look at what the jet stream would be doing there. Yeah, I mean, more of a southwest to northeast trough kind of cutting in like so. And you would get wind shear over that possible area. So we could definitely see a strong tornado threat, again, in some parts of maybe Mississippi or surrounding zones by the time we get to Saturday and Saturday night. A very active pattern. And the last thing that I want to talk about for the forecast part of the stream before we get into the questions of the people who are on here with me live, I do want to show the precipitation total forecast as we go through the next several days using this blended guidance on screen. By the time we get through the end of the day, Saturday, let's just talk about that time period. Let's zoom in more on the Ohio Valley region. Look at how much rain is anticipated. This is a crap ton of rain, everybody. Ohio, far southern parts of Michigan, especially back here into Indiana, at least 2 to 5 inches expected over a broad zone. You can bet there will be locally higher amounts in those bigger downpours we get out of specific thunderstorms. This corridor right here looks like the highest threat corridor from eastern Oklahoma up to western Kentucky and points in between, where storms are currently most likely to train. By the time we especially go through Wednesday night, and then through at least Thursday night, we'll even get more storms by the time we go towards Friday and Saturday, of course. By Saturday at 2 p.m., this guidance is indicating, on top of recent storms we've already seen, at least 6 inches of rain over some of these spots, and you can bet there will be some spots that get closer to 9 to 12 inches, or maybe even more. That's where we're going to get that especially catastrophic flood risk to develop. So be on the lookout there. Even back into North Texas, a few inches of rain expected. Let's go ahead and jump on over to that so you can see it. Again, all the way back to North Texas, a slight severe weather risk, and it's something that you got to keep in mind along with the flood threat that we're going to see. With that being said, let's see what we have going on here in the live chat. I see a lot of conspiracy stuff going on in the chat. Let's try to keep those opinions to ourselves. I'm not going to get into any of those discussions on here. And let's also keep some of the language at bay as well. Thank you to everybody for tuning into this live update as well. Hello to you, Brenda. I saw Weatherman of the North earlier. We've got Just a Weather Guy, SK. We've got Jake's Awesome Vids. Thanks to everybody who's been tuning in this evening. Again, I just kind of finished the forecast part of this update. If you're watching this after this update is posted and finished, by the way, you can always leave any additional questions that you have down below. Let's see. When I show the STP, the significant tornado parameter for Chicago, what's driving that? Well, I mean, look at the ingredients that we're going to have. I assume you're talking about for the Wednesday threat. Again, a very conditional strong tornado threat could develop in a place like Chicago deeper through the day on Wednesday. Let's go ahead and jump on over to this graphic. We'll leave it on this for now. HRRR model is showing, if we can, I wish we could get into Chicago specifically. Hold up a second. North Central Great Lakes, will that get it? Yeah, that kind of gets it. HRRR model, sorry, got to pull all this back up. And we're looking at the, I can do it right here. All right, here we go. Yeah. So again, to show you what he's talking about in the comments section or of the live chat down below, you can see right down here. Well, no, I don't make this graphic. This is a model graphic. I don't know exactly what goes into this, but there's a lot of ingredients that forecasters look at to predict tornadoes. You can see right there, there's your kind of conditional tornado threat that could come together. Again, you have to have storms in this environment and a few other things to come together for this to actually pan out. Just because you have the storm energy doesn't mean you have the storms. Certainly looks like an elevated extra little corridor of moisture bouncing on up there, some part of Wisconsin and northern Illinois getting that. At least that's possible for late Wednesday. But look, if we look at the same graphic here, the dew point, the moisture on the NAM model, shows a very similar thing. Moisture getting all the way up there to southern Wisconsin, and that could support that conditional late day round into Wednesday. In terms of the upper level winds, I think that's one thing that's probably driving that higher end tornado threat, because look at what happens as we go through the day. Incredible winds in the low to mid levels of the atmosphere crossing over a place like Chicago. These winds kind of moving in like this. Let's look at the winds a little bit closer down to the surface. Oh yeah, winds a little closer to the surface, already veering a little more like that. So you got a little bit of a rotation almost already occurring here, right? That's called wind shear going on in the environment. And again, you can kind of see that threat coming all the way up to Wisconsin, southern Michigan, and then stopping. Again, that conditional late day threat could develop somewhere in here, and it's something that you have to watch. Brenda says, thank you, is Lima. I believe you're talking about Ohio, if I remember correctly from your previous comments and questions. Going to deal with winds, rain, and hail for Wednesday. Let me find exactly where that is again. I don't want to look at your location incorrectly. Lima, Ohio. Thanks again, Brenda, for being a member. Of course, if anybody ever does want to monetarily support the channel, becoming a member, or the super chat $ button in the live chat below, those are always ways to support, but completely optional. Best thing you can do is always hit the like and subscribe buttons. Let's go ahead and jump on over here now to this graphic. All right, they're in Lima, Ohio, or Lima. Probably Lima. Looking at the line of storms that you're going to get tomorrow, probably as we go deeper through the day is when your threat for severe weather will arise. Going to my ONW severe scale first here, actually, you can see that I do have you there in western Ohio in a level 4 of 7 for severe weather. And that means that scattered to widespread damaging winds are especially going to be a threat. At least isolated large hail, probably closer to scattered in large hail. The tornado threat is going to be especially back down to your south and west, but we could at least see a few tornadoes all the way up to Ohio tomorrow. It looks like we might see some discrete storm activity. That is isolated supercells, and if we get any of these, you can see them on the screen. I'm glad you mentioned this because I talked a little bit less about these at the start of the stream. All the way on up here to Ohio, we could see a conditional threat, again, around and ahead of that line sometime late afternoon into the evening for these isolated storms. You can see them there. I'm not saying they'll happen, but there's that conditional threat that we do get a strong tornado or two on the leading edge of our storm line through the afternoon and evening. By the time the storm line actually moves in, that would be closer to maybe 10, 11 o'clock based on current guidance, but I wouldn't trust the exact timing right now. Just sometime, let's say late afternoon into the evening is when you need to be prepared. Sometime when this line moves in deeper through the evening, very well possibly after dark, that would be more of a damaging wind and hail threat as it moves in with more of an isolated tornado risk. Because again, when you get line segments of storms like this, you're mainly talking about damaging winds and hail, not a tornado threat. That's why it's those leading edge kind of notches and those supercells where we'd have that better chance for something like a tornado risk to come together. But with that being said, that is all I have for tonight's live update. Again, it is our Tuesday night when I'm recording this. Thank you to everybody who is tuning in now. If you have any further questions, drop them down below after the stream is ending right now.